I'm excited because today we're going to be talking about Xavier Sal. So, Xavier Sal is a commander that I've been brewing this deck for like a week, and there's probably still more cooking to do on it, but Xavier Sal is a 3-mana commander, black, green, and blue, for a 3/3 that has 2 abilities. One is to tap and remove a counter from another permanent you control to populate, activate only as a sorcery, and then the other is to tap, sacrifice another creature, and proliferate, again only as a sorcery. But what makes me really excited about this commander specifically is it gives me a home for 2 of my most favorite cards from one of the best sets, Gatecrash, which is just an all-around awesome set. It's around the time I was getting into Magic is when Gatecrash came out. And these cards haven't really had a home for me in Modern, they haven't had a home for me in Commander, but now they do. In Xavier Sal, these cards are all-stars, and I'm going to show you why. So this deck is going to leverage Evolve and mechanics like Evolve. So you could put this deck together in a bunch of different ways, but I had a bunch of 2-drop and 1-drop creatures that have the ability to get a counter on them before turn 3, so Xavier Sal can remove a counter and then populate turn 4 when he comes out and then untaps without summoning sickness. So this deck will play a lot of evolved creatures, a lot of creatures that can get counters on them, and you can get fancy with it. You could go 4-drops and 3-drops that have interesting evolved mechanics, like Fathom Mage. Whenever 1/1 counter is put on Fathom Mage, you may draw a card. You could have Tyrannid Prime to give all your creatures evolve, Simic Manipulator to have some gain control shenanigans. But I avoided these because Xavier Sal is a 3-mana commander, and a lot of these 3-mana evolved creatures conflict with the turn Xavier wants to be cast. So I went with the 1 and 2-drop evolved creatures and creatures that can get counters on them. But let me show you a little bit about how this deck is going to work. So we're going to create token copies of creatures. Some of them will be our creatures, some of them will be our opponent's creatures, and then we're going to use Xavier's ability to tap and remove a counter from a permanent we control, one of our evolved creatures, to populate these tokens that we're creating. And so the ideal play pattern with this deck is we'll have a turn 1 evolved creature, and turn 2 it doesn't really matter what we do. We just want to have some way of getting a counter on a permanent before Xavier comes out, so that when he does come out, he's ready to tap, remove a counter from that permanent, and start the populating shenanigans. And there's just a million different ways to do this in this deck. Getting a permanent with a counter in play before Xavier comes out. Bunch of different ways to do it in this deck, and there's a lot of different ways you could build this, and it's surprisingly more consistent than you'd think. So basically, Xavier's played turn 3, turn 1 and 2, somehow we got a permanent into play with a counter on it, and then turn 4, what we'll do after turn 3 playing Xavier, turn 4 we'll play some kind of a clone effect. We could clone our opponent's creatures, we could clone our creature, it doesn't really matter. But let's say we clone our opponent's Esper Sentinel. Esper Sentinel's a 1/1, so it's not going to evolve the Cloudfin Raptor. But what we could do is now Xavier doesn't have summoning sickness, so he can tap, remove a counter from the Raptor, and create a token copy of Esper Sentinel, which will then trigger the evolve of the Cloudfin Raptor, putting a counter on it. And it doesn't stop there, because Gatecrash introduced not only just some awesome cards in general and like a beautiful play environment, but it also introduced Burst of Strength. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature and untap it. So we have a bunch of different ways to untap Xavier and do this multiple times in the same turn. There's a lot of 1 and 2 mana ways to do this in Commander, especially in the Simic color combination that we're heavily leaning into here. So we've created our token copy, and let's say that it's turn 5. We untap with 4 lands, maybe we play a land, and then we tap Xavier, remove a counter from the Raptor, create another token, that token triggers evolve, the Raptor gets another counter, then we Burst of Strength to untap Xavier, and then we do it again to create another copy, which then evolves the Cloudfin Raptor, and then we could go off. We could keep untapping Xavier and continue to do this, or we could play another clone effect and then copy something else and then start creating token copies of that. But this deck works a lot of different ways. It's really like a 3-card combo. We need some way to have a permanent with counters on it, we need Xavier, and we need some way to create a token copy of a permanent, and we can put this together numerous different ways, copying our opponent's creatures, copying our own creatures with all kinds of untapped shenanigans, just some way for a cheap permanent to get counters on it, and then a way to create token copies of a creature, and then we can go in any direction from there based on whatever the game dictates. And with so many interchangeable parts, we're really only putting together 2 card combos of, and it's not really a combo, it's just a synergy that's cheeky, but some way to make a token copy and some way to put counters on a permanent. And when you support this with a bunch of traditional ramp, counter spells, card draw, and removal that we have in the Sultai colors, they can really pop off, because we can have all of our Simic nonsense and ways to untap creatures, and sometimes even go infinite if we were to use something like Dramatic Reversal and Ixalan Scepter, and then had a couple of ways. Maybe we copied Kior's Follower 3 times, and then we Dramatic Reversal Ixalan Scepter. That's kind of funny. Or we could clone maybe one of our opponent's non-legendary combo pieces and then just create a bunch of copies of that. All kinds of directions you could go. But more importantly than anything, I have found a home for my 2 favorite cards, some of my 2 favorite cards in Magic, in a deck they can be all-stars in, so I am thrilled. And yeah, comment below what you would put in Xavier Sal, because you can build this thing a million different ways. You have access to the color black as well, which I didn't cover too much, but you could do Undying synergies where you sacrifice another creature to proliferate and then remove the counters from the proliferate creatures, or from the Undying creatures, in order to populate counters. So Young Wolf and Strangleroot Geist are 2 candidates for that. You could Prime Speaker Zagana nonsense. You could even Grave Titan. All kinds of different ways you could go with it. But comment below, what would you add to Xavier Sal, and what do you think of this new and interesting deck?